Hey folks, welcome back to another Ruby Rogues episode. This week on our panel we have Valentino Stoll.
Hey now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And we were talking before the show. We had our guest cancel on us last minute. So if you're trying to watch this on YouTube and you're like, you're not talking about Solid Cache? No, we are not. We were chatting, and just to give a little bit of context, and I explained this to Valentino before the show. I've been using some of these AI tools that are out there for a while, but just kind of at a low level. And what I had essentially figured out a while back was that like Copilot will suggest snippets and stuff in Visual Studio Code, which is handy, right? Because a lot of times it suggests stuff that it's like, yeah, that's what I want. And if I'm doing the same structure in a couple of places, it was really good at figuring that out, right? It's like, oh, okay, same structure, different variables. But I'd also use like ChatGPT and some other tools for some of this stuff. And so one thing that I wound up doing was last night I was working on adding a new audio player to the member area of Top End Devs, because I'm basically revamping it because it's not what I wanted. And I figured out how to get at least much more close to what I want. So I was putting that in there, right, so that it kind of floats at the bottom of the screen and does a bunch of stuff. And I'd already done all the styling for that. And so I was I was using it basically as a lookup. So it's like, hey, what are the audio APIs in the browser that I can use, right, to put a nice looking player in controls? And I was just kind of, putting it together. And just on a whim, I'd been listening to a podcast, and I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the AI podcasts that I've recently picked up, but they were talking about how they were using it to actually either generate code or get checks on their code. And I was like, I wonder if I can just tell it to write me an audio player, right? Like just boom, I want an audio player that I can put in my browser. And so I tell it that, and it writes one, right? And I'm like, okay, well, let's see how good this is. So I turn around, right? Because in ChatGPT, you can tell it to refine the answer, right? So I tell it, okay, well, I'm using stimulus. I want the play and pause button to toggle to play or pause when I hit play or pause. I want the progress bar to change as it plays. I can't remember what else I told it, but I also told it I wanted it to be controlled through stimulus, and that I was using Tailwind, and that I wanted the play and pause buttons to not have words in them. I wanted it to use Font Awesome for the icons. And it spit the whole thing out. So then what I did is I was like, I know there are more features that I want on this. I just can't think of what they are. And so I asked it, I said, what other features should I be putting in this thing? And it turns around and it gives me a list of like 16 things, right? And like 10 of them were features that I might want if I wasn't just playing one episode. But there were like 4 or 5 of them that I was like, oh yeah, I want that too. I forgot. And so I put all those in, and so it's giving me a player. So I put it into the page, and it was a big square that took up like half the screen. And so I said, hey, I'm putting this into a bottom banner that has to fit into an H-32 sized space in the page. And so it condensed it. And so I picked it up and I put it into my Rails app, and and I'm thinking, okay, I had my developer tools open with the console, and I'm all ready to debug it, right? And because it probably got something wrong. And would you believe it? The thing just worked. Like it literally, like I tested every feature and it did exactly what it was supposed to do.
That's
so
awesome.
then I had to tweak the layout on it a little bit because it did look a little bit weird. But I mean, literally, it was just, okay, move this up here, make that wider. Okay, now it looks decent, right? I'm not sure I'm completely satisfied with the layout on it, but it works and it looks fine. So now I'm thinking, okay, what else is out there, right? And I've picked up some other tips and tricks, but we were talking before the show, and I kind of told this to Valentino, and he's going, oh yeah, I've got all kinds of tricks that I use. And so this is probably going to be more me picking your brain, Valentino, than offering any, awesome ideas or solutions. But it seems like there's a whole breadth of things that I'm just kind of opening up my mind to at this point. So yeah. So, I mean, I guess my first question is did you already know that ChatGPT would do this kind of a thing? And what else am I not even seeing in the wide world of, hey, make my code process better?
Yeah, there's so many things here. Yeah, I guess like if we take a step back and just like focus on like what we're trying to accomplish as like software developers, right? Like it kind of like breaks down into two things. Like one, like abstractly thinking about concepts
Mm-hmm.
and how to like design things, and the second would be like implementation detail. And so like there's two like avenues that I always like break things down to based off of that. And so like if we just focus on like the design aspects, like that's just great as like a GPT. Like, and for those that don't know, it's like a plugin for Chat GPT.
Uh-huh.
You can like I have one based on the stack that I use, which is Rails specific with Ruby and like XYZ design books that I've just like uploaded to the GPT. Right. So like I have like 99 bottles from Sandy Metz and like some AI specific ones.
Hang on. So what when you're saying like design books and you're talking about like kind of it sounds like you're kind of setting up the context for where you're asking your question.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, yeah, maybe we should reshape that. Like, what is a GPT?
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I'm surprised. This is totally like OpenAI's like miss here in marketing, right? It's because GPTs are incredible, right? Like, it's like a way of like encapsulating a purpose to all of the to Chat GPT, right? So you
Right.
get your like blanket features of Chat GPT of being able to be a general purpose utility to do
Right.
anything. And so it's great at code related stuff. But if like let's say like you want to like make super object oriented Ruby and Rails work, like that's prime candidate for making a very specific plugin to Chat GPT. And you can basically give it context, like documents that it can use as reference. And you can also give it like custom instructions to follow. So you don't have to like re-say those things over and over again. So like, let's say you have a prompt that you always go to that's like, hey, like pretend you're an expert in object-oriented design and Ruby, right? And I want you to follow these principles. If you're generating Ruby code, follow this like, you know, like linter related thing. And you can like reuse these prompts over and over again to get it to output the things how you want it to, rather than just like chatting through it. And so with a GPT, you can like front load all of that work and just have something reusable that you can go back to. And so I have this open GPT called the Software Architect Mentor, and I use it all the time. And it's like my abstract go-to for just like, okay, I'm designing something in Ruby, sometimes Rails, doing AI stuff. Like use all of that context to just help me design something or refactor something or do these things in an abstract way. So that way I don't have to worry about the implementation. I can focus on design.
So how do you get that into ChatGPT? And maybe I'm just, I haven't played with it enough to know this.
There's like a explore GPTs in
Okay, I
the
see that.
GPT sidebar, and you can just like start a chat with any one of those.
Oh, okay. So I could actually, instead of, because I'm just using the generic Chat GPT. I mean, that's what built my player for me. You're telling me I could have, because I clicked on it and I'm seeing like a website generator or a code copilot. So I could have used the code copilot, and what would have been faster or better or?
Yeah, it would be more focused. So I guess like faster and better are, kind of dependent on the use case. So
but it might narrow the scope of the answer.
It'll narrow the scope. Like it, as an example, if like, okay, well, let's say you're working on, I don't know, Go code or something like that. Like, there may be some conventions that could be useful, like using a very Go specific GPT. In the same way that using a Go specific prompt can help guide the generation of that, right? Like if you just say, hey, like ChatGPT, generate a program that like shows me a calendar, it'll just like use whatever its preference is based on your chat history with it. So like that could be any number of languages, could be any number of implementations. But if you like open up a Go GPT, it's going to use Go, right?
Right. So do they have a Ruby GPT in here, or did you kind of build your own?
There's a lot of people that have GPTs published there. Kind of just have to search through stuff.
Oh yeah.
I just have my own because I found it very useful.
Yeah, there are a bunch in here. Ruby.
I shared
a whole bunch of Rails and Ruby.
Yeah, I mean, you basically can give it knowledge, and that knowledge will be used to generate stuff with. And so like I personally have very specific like resources that I like to like have it reference. And I imagine other people do too, right? Like you have your books that you favor the design principles from, or how you like code implemented in specific ways based on, it doesn't have to be books. It could be websites, whatever resources that you use to code with, you can use. It can use.
So when you're pulling them in, because my mind's already blown, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole on this stuff real hard here after we're done. But because I could see, you create GPTs for other things. It sounds like that's in a way that's kind of what, when we talked to Obi, what he was talking about with Ray, right? Where you're giving it all that context. And then, yeah, you're doing some prompt engineering too. I want a response that looks like this or something like that. But the rest of it is, then you ask it a question, and from everything that you've told it, it gives you the focused or more correct answer. So when you're telling it, hey, I favor ideas from, I don't know, 99 bottles, or, maybe it's the Pooter book, what Principles of Object-Oriented Design in Ruby, or something like that. How do you reference that in? Do you just give it a URL, or?
I just upload the document.
Okay.
Right. You just, here's
a PDF.
You go, I buy the book, and then I get the PDF from it, and I upload it. Right. And then I can have it generate and based off of that. Right. Like,
okay. So how big is its brain? How much stuff can I cram in there?
I honestly haven't tested that, although I have gone through and just uploaded all the books that I've read, like from like my programming experience, and that I've found does not help. Like giving it more context doesn't help it. And to be honest, like that makes a lot of sense to me, because like the whole point of like this honed agent is like, that it's narrow in scope, right?
Right.
And so like the more that you can narrow that scope to like the very specific task that you plan to use it for, like the better. And I feel like, going back to Obi when we had him on, like that narrowing of the path is like the best way to think about like programming or like designing things with AI, is like creating the very specific thing that you want it to do. And like all of your instructions and knowledge and things that you're giving it are like honed in on that.
Yeah. It seems like, when we were talking to Obi, the thing that kind of stood out to me was because the Chat GPT, the GPT model that you're using, it has everything in it, right? So it does baking, it does auto repair, and it has Ruby stuff in it, right? And so if I tell it, hey, I need you to help me write better code, then if I use a term that is also used in baking, me narrowing the path is just telling it, I only want the stuff that's relevant to programming in Ruby. And so right. And then there's other training in there too that might be, and I'm looking for things formatted this way, and I'm looking for, ideas in this vein or things like that. I've also heard from people the idea that essentially you can, and I've seen some other people do this where they've like uploaded all the content that they've made about a topic, and then they essentially have like I could create a Chuck GPT, right? And it would be, hey, this is all the knowledge that Chuck has ever put out about whatever. And I thought about doing that for like a Ruby Rogues, right? And so I could upload the audio and, or upload transcriptions or something. But my worry is we've been doing this show for like 13 years. And so some of the stuff we talked about 13 years is very relevant. And some of the stuff we talked about 13 years ago is not very relevant. And so I worry that then it's going to go, oh, well, I consider, the 13-year-old content as relevant as the right. And so maybe I can tell it, hey, favor the newer stuff over the older stuff and put that into the context. But yeah, I've kind of hesitated on doing that just for that reason.
Yeah, we're like we're edging very, very close to like the retrieval aspect of like AI design, which maybe off topic a little bit because there's so much there. But yeah, I mean, I think if we circle back to like the tools that we're using here, like there's so much like that you can use out off the shelf that like if you just use them in the specific ways, like you can skirt around those issues, right? So like as an example, there's somebody just released this Rails app called Nausea, NOSIA.ai.
I think you picked that last time.
Yep, and it's like super awesome. Runs on Olama locally, and you can like upload whatever documents you want it to use and run your own chat GPT in a Rails context with all of that stuff built in. Really cool.
Is it in French, or am I looking at the wrong thing?
Yeah, I mean, the site, I think, is in French, but the repo is in English.
Okay. Well, and Google will translate it. It's good at that.
That's right. But yeah, I mean, this idea is like not new, right? Like there's lots of other tools out there as well that you can use to kind of just get a local version of ChatGPT running so that you can do this with. Like if you have, for example, you want to narrow the retrieval aspects to only relevant stuff based on timestamp or something like that, like that's going to require some like alteration.
Right.
Like there's not anything built in the ChatGPT to allow that kind of granularity without like building something on top of its APIs.
Right.
But there's a lot more stuff coming out that I like that's revolves around like the command line aspect, where it'll like basically use your current working directory as like a test bed to like scan for relevant documents and also like build up its like task at hand. So like one that immediately comes to mind is a tool called Aider, AIDER. Also runs fully locally.
That's a French word too. It means to help.
Yeah. Lots of French in the AI space. Hugging Face as an example. Definitely French. Mixtral, right? So many great AI things come out of France. But so with a tool like Aider, like it basically uses Tree Sitter and like scans through your repo, right? So like if you're like, oh, I want to, like change the contact page to add another field for this specific thing in my Rails app, it'll go through and it'll scan the Rails app locally and then find what files that it needs to include as context, and then walk through like a step-by-step process of, okay, what files do we need to touch, what changes do we need to make that request happen, and it could even like alter these files. which is really really exciting. Because ultimately that's what I would, I'd rather. Part of the problem with like just using ChatGPT for like, code generation in general, like it doesn't have context, and it also like it makes mistakes like all the time, and then you're like stuck trying to figure out, what mistake is this, like why is there a bug here, right? And you can do that in ChatGPT too, but it's just like it slows things down quite a lot. And so when you get something that's more like wrapped around the thing that you're building, it makes it much like smoother of an experience.
That's awesome. So that was Aider, or in French, Aider.
Yeah, Aider. And there's like a more polished version of it, if you will, called Code Buff. But it's expensive. But it uses the more flagship models like from OpenAI or Anthropic, depending on the context. So like you get better quality outputs from it because of that. And you could also use OpenAI for Aider too, but it's definitely not as polished as CodeBuff.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure we have all the links in the go, folks. If you're looking for the links, there it looks like it's posting it to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and not Twitter or LinkedIn. So it'll all be in the comments there. So yeah, I mean that's helpful just because it can work from the context of the stuff in your actual code base.
Yeah, and a lot of the back and forth stuff with implementation related tasks, right? It's like it can eat up time, right? Like it just reminds me of like some of the original like code generation stuff, like even like Rails generators as an example, right? Like it's just like it'll just dump a ton of code at you, and you're just like, well, what do I do with that? Right? Or if like it doesn't do what you want, like you have to figure out what that is, and like it doesn't know. Right? Like there's no context, it's not aware of anything, right, other than what it's been trained on. So like it's definitely it's a hard experience to like just go in. And I can't imagine, like, just imagine if you were like learning Rails for the first time, right? Or Ruby, or like even just like RESTful APIs, right? Like I just remember those concepts being like, challenging to understand. If you have something like that's just generating stuff and you don't really understand how it works, like you could lose a whole day just like figuring out a mistake it made. Where if like, you instead followed some tutorial that somebody wrote, like maybe you would have a different experience. That's still doing that though. You have a similar experience sometimes if you like are missing a package or something like that. But like definitely more frequent with ChatGPT.
Yep. So CodeBuff and Aider, those are on the command line, right?
Yep. Yeah, those are all command line. I mean, there's so much Ruby stuff out there now, right? We had Scott Warner on from Sublayer. Sublayer is awesome, like fully Ruby, like developer happiness, like AI helpers, right? Like you can get it to like watch your file system and perform actions with AI. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with it. I have one where I'll feed it a Ruby file and it generates a spec for me. So if I'm like, prototyping a new module or class or something like that, or some Ruby code, I could just set, if I like wanted to turn it into something that I wanted to share with people. I hadn't made a spec yet, but I was abstracting and just working on design concepts. And now, all right, I fleshed this out. I want it like tested. And I'll go and I'll say, hey, here's a Ruby file. Like, can you create an RSpec test for this? And I just have a single command line command, and I just feed it the Ruby file, and it generates the RSpec test for me.
Oh, wow.
And it's awesome.
I've been going through that with one of my clients' deals where, like, yeah, they've got this heinous, class that has a bunch of stuff going on in it. And yeah, I was like, they're like, hey, you got to speed this up. And I'm like, I am not messing with this thing until I have a test on it. Right. I mean, just so that I know that I didn't change the behavior, not necessarily because the behavior is correct. Though I'm sure it's mostly correct because they've been using it that way for a while. So yeah, that sounds really handy.
Yeah. And, even too on their, I think on their docs, they have like, or maybe it's on YouTube. Scott has this demo where, he basically creates a tool that like, tell the tool, okay, here's this file, the tests are failing, get them to pass, right? And it'll go through and run through the code and like get the test to pass.
Oh, wow.
And so like that's a more like advanced thing you can use it for, but like yeah, I mean, I feel like we're just kind of starting to scratch the surface here. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because like all of these large language models, they're not trained necessarily on Ruby.
Right.
Right. And so like there's obviously a small sample in there, or it wouldn't be able to do what it can. But it definitely will, like, if you're using ChatGPT heavily, you'll see it like use Python related standard libraries for Ruby. Right. And you're like, wait, that doesn't exist. Like, where are you requiring this, like, data frames or something like that? Which there are data frames of Ruby, just not like natively, right?
Yeah, I asked it to. So I basically said, hey, I want to run Whisper locally to get diarized, which means, or a diarized transcript, I should say. So it transcribes it, but then it assigns, speaker 1 said this, speaker 2 said that. And Whisper doesn't do, because I knew that Whisper doesn't do diarization out of the box. And so, yeah, its answer was install these Python libraries and then call Python from Ruby. Which, fine, okay. But, because I don't know that there is a Ruby library that'll do it. But, yeah, it was interesting. And, in fact, I think it started out saying, generating diarized transcripts for a podcast episode with multiple guests using a local installation of OpenAI's Whisper model in Ruby requires the following steps. Install Whisper locally. Whisper is a Python library, so you need Python installed. And ensure that you have the required dependencies. So I have to install FFmpeg, and then it says Whisper does not natively perform speaker diarization, so you have to use a diarization library. And it tells you to use pynote.audio, which is also a Python library. And then it says integrate with Ruby. And so, then it's telling you to, write this quick little Python script and then call the Python script from Ruby.
When it comes to like doing like larger scale builds, right? If you're trying to get ChatGPT to like build a full-fledged command line application, as an example, right? Like it's gonna struggle. Right. There's gonna be a lot of back and forth. You may have multiple chats open. It's gonna be difficult. Right. The one thing I have used that's worked well for that kind of thing is honestly Claude. Anthropic's Claude, setting up a project for that specific thing that you're building, creating an overall context with the purpose that you're using it for to build, and outlining what all the requirements are in that. And then you can just start iterating through the chats to implement the specific features. I use that all the time, and the code it outputs, it can like start in like building on top of itself. So it has these things called artifacts which are just the files that it generates.
Right.
And you can add them to the project as it creates things that you like, and you can edit in context and start including it in the project, and it'll literally build the whole application just like in front of you. And it's a little funny because there's this project called E2B developer where somebody has built basically like an open source version of this of Claude's artifacts, or again you can like kind of spin up your own like like a AWS instance and have like the AI literally like run files and create files and run the scripts and stuff. And so what people do with it ultimately is like you can get it to literally make like a front end game, or like if you're building like a web app, it'll like build the actual app and run it in the browser for you.
So, I mean, this kind of, because I mean, we started talking about, okay, how do we enhance our development experience with AI? I talk to people and they're afraid of AI taking their jobs. And so it sounds like you're getting real close to saying, you know, somebody with a minimum level of prompt engineering experience might be able to do it.
Well, there's a saying in the AI space, garbage in, garbage out.
Fair.
Right? And so there's a yes and no to that, right? Like, is it going to take all of our jobs now, right? Like, honestly, it's like giving people superpowers, right? Like, whatever powers you do have now, like that's all your knowledge and all your skills that you've accumulated, or even if you're just starting to accumulate them, right? Like it basically just like gives it like amplifies all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you're, you know, if you want to be like a senior dev, like you could honestly just start today using AI tools.
Right.
And you'll get pretty close, right? Like maybe, you know, your job won't consider you that, but like you'll definitely start to see a considerable improvement in like how quickly you can accomplish things.
Right. I think the way that I think about it is more along the lines of like, because you're talking about it the same way I'm thinking about it is in that, hey, this is a really, really powerful tool, right? And so it can shortcut a whole bunch of things that we used to just go and have to kind of reinvent by hand on a regular basis, right?
A perfect example is like the, you know, post generator aspect, right? Like let's say you do Rails new and you're really just trying to like get a page up that's like lets you see users, right? Or whatever the resource you may have. You know, there's a very specific series of steps you follow just to get to that point where you can start to crud through. Oh, I want to add this user with this, or I want to contact lists. I want to add people. You know, like the AI can help like through all those steps so that you don't have to focus on all those upfront. Right. Like you could just get to that page and be like, okay, great. Now, like all of that initialization configuration aspect, which the generators start, but you have to like finish out, like that finishing out portion is done too. Right. Like you can sidestep a lot of the, you know, the tidying up that comes from generators, which is kind of exciting, right? Because like that aspect of programming is like widespread, right? Like the idea of like, okay, I have a template that I'm working off of and I want to customize it to get to, you know, ground zero of my application. And like you have to get through that, you know, series of steps that you're just stepping through. And like AI is great at that. It's great at stepping through stuff, especially when all of those requirements are predefined, right? Like Rails new with what, right? Like you can Rails new any number of things. You could base it off an existing template you have. You know, if you have a gem you're building for Ruby, right? Like bundle gem new, you know, you have like all of your existing authorships and like where you're going to publish it to. Like there's just like a lot of details that you end up having to add every time that gets old.
Right.
And it's like repetitive. And like the more things that you could just like get out of the way and just start building. Like I bet right now, if you looked at rubygems.com, like there would be a huge spike in published gems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't doubt that right now. And I feel like that's maybe going to be where the jobs aspect comes in play here, is that there's going to be a lot more maintenance burden, right? Like, we can create exponentially, and maintenance is going to drag behind there.
Right. Yeah, I think the rest of the thought that I was trying to make, and then I want to kind of address the other piece that you're talking about here, is that, yeah, effectively you have these tools that, if you're still going to have to gain experience the same way the rest of us do, right? So you're going to use AI, it's going to generate some stuff, and then, yeah, you're going to walk into the same walls that we did. You just got there a little faster because you didn't have to go and slog through all the stuff that you already knew how to do, right, to get there. And so I think that's where, if you were already a senior developer and you use these superpowers, then you can use the tools essentially and say, I need this refined this way, right? This isn't quite what I'm looking for, because I know that if it's put together like this, I'm opening myself up to this problem later. And so, hey, can you handle this too? Right. And then it can modify the code.
I mean, you bring up a great point. Like, if you're using AI as a tool and you're getting hung up on something, then you're using it wrong, right? Like, if you're using the tool and like you're kind of banging your head on like getting it to do what you ask,
mm-hmm.
like it's more than likely that it's just like you're not using it the right way.
Right.
It's like kind of funny because like that's like a meme, right? Like it's like you're holding it wrong from Steve Jobs, right? But it's so true. Like like the AI tools are built like in very specific ways, yeah. And if like you're not seeing the results you expect, like it's right. Not being used in the way that it should be.
Yeah, you need to give it more context, or ask it in a more specific way or a more appropriate way,
or approach it completely differently.
Yeah.
Right? Like there are so many ways to get it to do the same thing, and so like, yeah, if you're like, that's kind of like the beauty of AI is like you can literally scrap everything and start over like pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say if you're like trying to explore the realms of all of this stuff, like use the interfaces that make the most sense to you, right? Because there are so many, and like if you're fighting it early on, you're going to continue to fight it.
Yeah. Yep. But I think overall, I guess to a certain degree, then if it gives developers superpowers, going back to the idea, is it going to take jobs? If it gives us superpowers and it makes us that much more efficient, then and this may be more of a business philosophical question than an actual like practical, are they going to fire developers? Does that take away jobs, or does this just mean that, hey, look, we've got X budget for developers, and so now if we train all of our people to use these tools to enhance what they can do, we can get this much more done, right? And so do we actually lose jobs, or maybe do we lose junior developer jobs, which seems kind of short-sighted because we are going to eventually need more senior developers. How do you see that shaking out in the grand scheme of things, or do we just not know?
I mean, I see it as more transitional, right? Like the common analogy that I've heard is like the transition from horse and buggy to automobiles, right? Like very similar modes of like transport in that you have wheels, right? And you have like somebody steering it. It's just a matter of what's powering it, right? That changes. But the infrastructure and things related to it, and all, like as an example, whips, like the accessories around all of this stuff are just changing shape, right? but the underlying infrastructure around it is still very much the same, right?
Right.
Like,
so we may need less people that shovel poop and more people that are machinists and auto mechanics.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's ultimately where we're going to get into, is like more specialized aspects, right? And like that's honestly what we've been seeing taking shape before AI started, as like frameworks become more popular, and like Kubernetes as an example, right? Like all of these abstractions. I mean, DHH makes a great point, like about abstractions in general. If you could abstract away like the concepts in a way that, you know, makes it so that you have a more straightforward point of use, right? Like all the details, like somebody else is working on those.
Right.
Right. And you can, you know, rest assured that, you know, those people that are specialized in it are going to produce, you know, that make it easier and more modular and extendable for your general purpose use. Right.
Right. So I'm going to shift gears on you just a little bit, because we've talked about using AI mostly to generate code. And then you were talking about how you can use Claude to effectively incrementally generate basically an entire application. Actually, I'm going to change my question, because it came into my head as I was talking about this. So if you've got something like Claude that can generate pretty much an entire application, I mean, are there limitations to that? Like, are there areas where you may tell it you want it to generate a thing and it's just not, you know, it's not going to be good at that, or it's good at it up to a certain point, and then after that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see limitations, right? Like, it's good up to a point. It's good at like cobbling together like a, you know, MVP or like a first version of something. But as soon as you want to add something new or make changes to it, it starts to break down pretty quickly.
Right.
And what you end up having to do is break it apart. And I mean, honestly, very similar to just general software engineering, right? Is like you break it apart into smaller pieces and then focus on those smaller pieces.
Yeah.
And you know, Kent Beck has like a great like saying around this, on like, you know, make the change easy and then make the easy change, right? Like,
Right.
And that's ultimately what ends up happening as you start to develop like things with AI on a larger scale.
So you kind of answered the other question I was going to ask, which was, so let's say I have like a bunch of code. I don't want to say legacy code, because people take that to mean different things, right? If you read Michael Feathers, it's just code without tests. But, you know, so you've got this older code that, you know, was written, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, that still works, but you find, hey, maybe I want to refactor it so that it's easier to maintain, or I want to add a feature to it, right? And so I was going to say, mostly we were talking about generating code, but yeah, what about modifying code or refactoring code or rethinking code? And it sounds like the answer to that is, yeah, you take the relevant parts out, you tell your large language model about it, right? Here's my view, here's my controller, here's my model, you know, here's the feature that it's supposed to implement. You know, I need to add this other feature and then see what it does with it.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. And you know, circling back to like the more you know, the more point of use tools like Aider or like Code Buffer or something like that. You know, like it can gather that context for you. Like the
Right.
most difficult part, like of the whole refactoring aspect and making modification, is like the you know, file spread, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you have this giant, you know, service class that you've just put everything in to make the abstraction easier, and it's just becoming too unwieldy to make changes to it, and you want to break it apart into smaller pieces so that the responsibilities are broken out appropriately, right? Getting it to extract those and make new files and things like that, and getting it to orchestrate all of them, like that kind of change becomes more difficult. And so like that's where, like, again, back to the specialists, like, that's why I don't think our jobs are going anywhere necessarily. Is like, it doesn't know how to make code friendly and easy to read.
Right.
Right. And
it just knows how to make code like what it's already been trained on.
And exactly. And so, like, let's say even that you get it to train on a whole bunch of code that you have that is in a pleasant way, like it'll get to a point where you're trying to do something novel, you're trying to introduce a new concept, and like it doesn't know how to break apart the existing design concepts and apply it to the new novel approach of implementing something that you're trying to do. So like it might be able to get like, okay, we want a service class, we want to encapsulate this form logic in an object oriented way. It can do these abstract concepts, but like the actual implementation of the whole flow starts to break apart, and like it'll just become messy and and messy as a human, right, to read. Where like maybe the code works and it runs, but the naming conventions will start to break down, and it won't make sense. It'll just make sense to like very specific things that it's making, right? And it does, yeah. I mean, it doesn't have knowledge of the world at every moment,
right? Yeah, that makes sense. Right. So we go from sort of the like I said, shoveling poop, right, where it's kind of the generic, easy to pick out cleanups that it may pick up just because it's got a bunch of code samples that it was trained on that are reasonably well written, and so it can adapt a lot of that stuff out. But yeah, the more involved refactors and things like that, it hasn't been trained on. I get from here to here,
right?
And
yeah, and I mean it is great for refactoring if you have the narrow enough scope where okay, you have like, even if you have like 3 files and you're like, this is just too many files to handle, like can we like reduce the complexity here? Like you can guide it in a way that it can help you eventually reach the goal that you're trying to get to. But
you may have to,
if you don't like if you don't understand like how to help it get there, how to help it help you get there, right? Then it's going to be more difficult to work with it than it is just you figuring it out.
Right. So you may be able to hand it a class with 500 lines in it and say, this class is too large. What responsibilities do you see here? And it may or may not be able to pick them out. And then if it does, then maybe you can start asking it, okay, which methods belong to which responsibility? And then from there, you can start to figure out how to have it help you divvy it up and, extract the class.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that like all this reasoning stuff, like with these models, a lot of this comes out of there, right? Because like that's ultimately where software like comes in play, is like you have these like design, buffer ahead of time that you work through to figure out ultimately what needs to change or get created. And like that's very stepwise, like, and that process is like, okay, I'm thinking about doing this thing. Help me break out the steps. What approaches are there? And once you've scattered and then figured out which pieces of it that you actually care about, right? Getting it to identify those things is nice. And then you're still left with, okay, well, I should make the best choice in this moment. Which I'm hopeful that the future might like focus more around like the selection aspect of those design choices. But yeah, there's still a lot of like the reasoning aspect of these things that is missing.
Right. So are there other tools or approaches that you're using?
Let's see, what else is in my toolbox? I mean, for design stuff, I definitely use that software architect mentor one just to hash through ideas. I use Langchain a lot. Langchain RB has some great abstractions around working with AI development and integration. We talked about Ray, RAIX, which is great, like Rails plugin to just like get your Rails app hooked up to various AI related design things.
Yeah, and there's Ray, and then there's Ray Rails.
Yep.
So the one is the Ruby extension, the other one's the Rails.
And to be honest, Langchain RB, they have Langchain Rails, which also adds some similar integrations.
Right.
And then there's the whole agent side of things too, which
isn't that what Ray is kind of focused around, is building those agents? Or are you talking about agents that people have already built for Ruby stuff?
So there's like there's two ways of thinking about it. Like if you're just like, if you want to augment your applications with AI, like use it as a tool, like that's more like Ray or
right.
Things like that, where you just want to introduce, hey, I have this model and I want it to auto generate stuff based on these column names, or I have this prompt and I want to guide through a process, and you can create kind of like these abstractions around those ideas.
Yeah, that's the level that I'm looking at working in. So, for example, with what I've built for top end devs, I'm basically to the point now where I'm starting to show other people how I run things, and they're telling me that they want my platform as much as they want my method, right? And so I'm imagining, you have something that you built in Ray, and it's essentially, so like when our guest today, I almost said his name, but I don't want to call him out. He's a great guy, and that he had a good reason for canceling today. But right, so if that happened, right, I would like it to go and have my agent, which has access to the back end, right, say, okay, we're gonna reschedule him for whenever, or we're gonna pick another topic and bring it in, right, and have it intelligently do that. But then also have my users be able to, as much as they go in and just modify stuff in the form, right, that I built in Rails, but also just say, I don't like the title of episode 522. I think it needs to be more focused on this topic. Or, we used this as an example. So like JavaScript Jabber, one of the episodes, I kept bringing up examples from Rails to illustrate points, right? And so the AI generated title that wound up getting put in there without me catching it had Rails in the title, and that wasn't what the episode was about at all. And so it would have been nice to be able to just tell it, instead of going in and try and do whatever, say, I need a title that's less focused on, that doesn't include Rails and talks about this topic instead, and then have it smart enough to go and generate a new title and ask me if that's okay, kind of thing. Right? Where the UI is now, I can either speak to it or type into a chat and have it do the right thing. Reschedule this episode. Okay. I'm going to go modify it in the calendar. I'm going to go send new invites to the guest and the hosts, and right, do all the other process things, because it has access to the back end of my system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I get excited about that, and I think that is a more intuitive interface for a lot of business owners that literally just want a content strategy that gets them business.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just trying to supplement your existing business, right, like using something like Ray or Langchain or one of these other supplemental libraries, right, like it makes a lot of sense. It just hooks right into it. You don't very minimal modification, and like long-term support, just like is super easy to modify and update the prompts pretty easily, right? But if you're trying to get like something more complex out of like the AI systems, that's kind of where like agentic system design comes in play. And that's like where you want like, AI to do a specific job, and like a chain through a bunch of steps. And so like there's tools like Active Agents as an example. Justin Bowen, he just released this framework, which is pretty awesome for managing agentic system flows like that. And then there's like, Alex Rudolph, we had him on. He's the Ruby Open AI Jam author, right?
Such a good dude.
He has AI Engine, the AI Engine Gem. It's with railsai.com. And that he has assistance framework built in where you could just hook into to get various code like to do stepwise things with. There's just like it's like if you're looking to cobble it, like one of the greatest things I saw was actually from Toby Lukett from Shopify.
Mm-hmm.
He gave this like internal like presentation where it was all developed by AI, and he had basically like made these little agents. He made a virtual office, and this was the program. And the virtual office had individual agents, which were basically just people with a very specific role, like a software engineer, a marketing person, research assistant,
Uh-huh.
and each agent had a loop, and it went through and it thought about what it had to do. It like had some tools available to it to perform that task.
Right.
And then periodically, all of the agents would get together and they would like have a meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like they could, if they needed information from another agent, like they could reach out to the other agent and work together on producing those details, right? And then, what you can do is you could scale this, right? Is you could say, okay, I want like 5 developer agents, right? Like I want 5 marketing people on this effort, and they would all work together and work on scaling and then conferring their judgments together for better results. And if you think about it again, like he basically said, well, then you can also scale your offices, right? Like,
right.
So like, let's say I have one office working on this. I can have many offices working on this, and maybe they're all working on their own different things, but ultimately coming together for the business like right purpose. And so it's really interesting idea of like these virtualization like containers of all of these very specific things doing very specific tasks. And so if you want to like build a business around that idea, like you're going to go through some kind of agent or assistant programming.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I'm excited about. Right. I just see all kinds of opportunities with that. Was there anything else that we should dive into here? We've been talking for about an hour.
I mean, I could keep going. There's so many
with one more thing.
Yeah. I mean, so the Latent Space podcast is just incredible.
I just started listening to that.
Oh my gosh. They are just like in it deep, right? Like if you want your mind blown about like what is happening in the AI space, like they're exposing it pretty great. And one thing that is like frequently talked about is like the importance of like evaluating the outputs, right, and getting benchmarks. And so like 2 of these concepts are like the Hugging Face has a great like library on their eval framework. Let me see if I can remember what it is. Face eval. Yeah, eval guidebook. And so they have like basically this like how do you get run tests against these outputs so that you can guarantee that they're doing it what you want of them, right? Because that's one of the biggest things. Is like there's so much variability in their output, right? Like it's token by token, so like if it gets off track at any point, like it could all of a sudden like break down pretty easily. And if you have that hooked up into a series of processes that depend on each other, right, like that falls apart pretty quickly. And so like setting up these kind of like benchmarks and evaluations is just like there's a whole industry like focus on this, right? And that's where you get these like leaderboards that benchmark all of these models based on different criteria. Like how well do they, one I just saw recently, there's an evaluation or a leaderboard for doing debates, right? Like how well do the models like argue on a point? And so there's like a new leaderboard now where which models perform best at this, right? Like which ones are most convincing.
Right.
And it's pretty great. And so like there are a bunch of leaderboards and all of them are based on these evaluations, right? Where you have output and you give it input and you expect a very specific reconstruction of that every time, right? And so that's actually something I focus on quite a bit at work, building stuff for physicians, right? It's pretty important to get it to do exactly what you want.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, and Latent Space is what? Swix or Sean Wang?
Yep.
And Alessio, I can't remember his last name.
But yeah, I mean, I would Hugging Face is definitely like they are awesome. They're just killing it on all fronts here.
Oh yeah,
even the robotic stuff. I don't know if you play. I have a little. They have this thing called the Robot, and it's a robotic arm that you can train with AI, just like on your MacBook. And you point.
That sounds fun.
You point a camera at it, and I've built it like that. You build two of them, right? Like one to train it with, and one to do things with. And it has this thing called telepresence where it repeats, what you're doing with one robot arm to the other, and then it trains and model based on that. And so you could train it to do different things. So like pick up, sort M&Ms or sort Legos or pick up. I'm trying to get it to write like "Hello World," right? And you could train it to do this just like by having it watch itself and repeat those training examples like in a virtual environment. Right. So they have like this whole framework they built around that. It's so fascinating. The robotics aspects of all of this stuff is pretty wild.
Yeah, it sounds like a whole different can of worms.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, if people are looking to enhance their code stuff, and we didn't even get into, JavaScript and front end if you're doing stuff with that. But beyond kind of the stepping stones that we've already talked through, right? Are there good places for people to just kind of keep an eye out and go, see what else kind of crops up?
I mean, really just start small. Like this space is always going to change fast and there's going to be new things, but there's like foundational concepts and tools like becoming popular, right? Like Langchain is like a widely popular thing that's just super easy to get set up and running with.
Right.
Granted, it's in Python, and that's fine. Like,
yeah, but it looks like you've got Langchain RB, so it's like calling a database or another API service or something.
Right. I mean, really, it's just like finding those abstractions that just help like get to the point and learn the basics. Right. Like the best tool you can find to do that with is going to be the best one, right? Because like there's so many concepts to learn. Like just break down like how you chain it all together, right?
Right.
And so like start with the very basic small stuff like sublayer. If you're in Ruby, like sublayer is a great starting point. Like you open up a Ruby file and you include sublayer and you can perform some LLM magic, right? Awesome tool, create different actions. Like they have a library you can go and just like take all the various actions that they publish, right? So if you want to, as an example, like red green tests passing, like there's like an agent for that you can download and get running just from a URL. So like I would say just like pick one tool and learn it. Like that's going to be the fastest way.
Yeah. I guess at this point we'll go ahead and do picks. Yeah. I mean, I'm just sitting here kind of thinking through all the implications of all the stuff we talked about. Because I knew that there was a whole level of stuff that I hadn't seen. And one thing that I'm really wanting to do or thinking about doing here is just putting together essentially tutorial videos on how to do a lot of this stuff. Right? It's like, hey, here's how you work through some of these things or use some of these tools, just to give people an idea and an example. Anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and jump in with picks, and then we'll wrap up. But yeah, we've got all kinds of links on the YouTube broadcast that says it's about solid cash. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and go first? What picks do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I have to, call out the Ruby AI Builders Discord. Like, awesome.
Oh, they're so great.
Honestly, if you're looking for one thing to like learn all this stuff, like just join that Discord. You'll learn plenty. And people are just like so willing to help out and point you to where you need to go and what you're looking for. Super helpful. Sublayer also has a Discord if you're looking to dive into that as well. Yeah, I mean, next to that, yeah, I'm just chugging away on this like Ruby Lang AI project I started. It's like very slow progress, but ultimately I'm like trying to fine tune a model, a very small model. They call them, SML instead of LLM. But I'm trying to like fine tune smaller models that are very purpose driven for Ruby code generation, with the ultimate goal of being able to like, further fine tune it on existing code bases so that you can get it to generate things based on the context of your organization's code. And I'm making some pretty good progress. I'm trying to use as much Ruby as I can. And so I have, this PyCall library that I'm using to ultimately just shell out to Python for the things that Ruby can't do yet. But that gap is slowly closing in thanks to Andrew Kane, who's just like a monster with all of this machine learning stuff in Ruby. He is just putting out stuff left and right. And I guess on that topic, there is a gem called Informers that he has that lets you run inference for Ruby. And it's really great. You can basically just like point a Hugging Face model at it and run inference using Ruby. Super fun stuff to play with. If you're just trying to like summarize something as an example, like there are great smaller models that do specifically that. And they work great. You don't need like to reach out to OpenAI every time when you just want something small. The output's much faster, right? So check that out.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna do some picks. I always do the board game pick. Lately, so last weekend I was teaching games at the board game convention again, and so we had 5 games that we were demoing. So I'm going to pick some of those over the next 4 or 5 weeks. One of the games I've already picked on this show because I played it at SaltCon in March, and so I'm not going to pick that. That's Challengers. If you haven't checked it out, very fun game. The game that I'm going to pick today is called Gnome Hollow, and I have to say, so there are different aspects of board games. I haven't really discussed this much on the show. There are different aspects of board games that make them fun, right? So some of it is kind of the flow of the game. Some of it's, how much you have to think about what you're doing and how much you have to plan ahead and whether or not you like that kind of a game. And, and so that's down to like complexity or things like that. Not always. Some of it's like for example, Gnome Hollow has a pretty simple cadence to each round. It's just the thinking ahead, right? Because you're going to build something out and then you're going to capitalize on it. And then there's some movement aspect and you have to decide what you're going to do every turn. So the way that it's played is you're trying to complete mushroom rings in the forest. Okay. And, your mushroom rings don't have to be round, but they have to be a complete loop. So, you can build a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6. It's hex tiles, and so it's the number of hex tiles that are on the loop that you made. And you get to move a marker down when you complete a ring, right? As long as there's a space for it. So you can do 1 3, you can do 2 4s, and then you can do like 4 5s, 4 6s, and 4 7s. You don't have that many markers. And on the 7s, if you move one down, 2 of the rewards on the 7s is you get to move a second marker down and get another reward. So anyway, it's pretty cool. The different rewards either modify the game board or they give you some other reward that gets you points. So if you complete a loop, for every 2 loops you complete or every 2 markers you move down, more appropriately, you get to discover a wildflower. And then you get the wildflower. You get a wild as part of your reward for discovering a wildflower. And then the rest of them go up for other people to be able to collect. And so you get points for every wildflower you collect. You get points for every marker you've moved down into the reward space. And then you get points when you complete the loop or the ring, you get the mushrooms that are on the ring. And so then you can go to the market and sell the mushrooms. And those are the 3 ways to get points. You add them all up at the end. That's how you score. So then it's just a matter of getting enough of the right kinds of mushrooms to make your trip to the market worth it. And then the other thing is if you say you cash in 5 red mushrooms, you actually fill the spot for 5 red mushrooms, and nobody else can do 5. They can do 6, they can do 4, but they can't do 5. And then when somebody does 6, right, then that is also gone, right? So maybe you go 7 or 8. And so the different mushrooms are worth different amounts because you have different rarity on the hexes you place. So you place 2 hexes, you collect the rewards for completing your loops, and then you move your gnome, and you move your gnome to reserve a path that will eventually become a loop, or you move your gnome to a sign, which is one of the rewards you get for completing a loop, or you can move it up to the market and sell mushrooms, or you can go and collect the flower. And and so then at the end of the game, whatever you've accrued in the different kinds of flowers and stuff, that's how you win. So I played it like 3 or 4 times at the game convention because that was one of the games that people wanted to learn. And anyway, it's a lot of fun. Board Game Geek weights it at 2.17. And so kind of your average gamer with enough complexity to make the game interesting is about a 2. So this is just slightly more complicated than that. And the complication really is, what do I get for completing the loop? How do I make the loop large enough to get the reward I want, right? Instead of a 4, make it a 6 or a 7, and you have to plan ahead to make your path go the right way. And then, when you move the gnome, do I move it to a sign to get more mushrooms? Do I move it to the market? Do I move it to the thing? And which ones do I sell back? And is somebody going to sell back the 8? And I have 8, so now I can only sell back 7. So that's where the complexity is it's in that play so that you're making the right moves to accrue the most points. And anyway, super fun game. It takes about 45 minutes to play it, which is also great. Plays up to 4 people. I've played it with 2, with 3, and with 4. I think with 3 and 4 people, it's more fun because you have a lot more going on the board and you have a lot more options that open up more quickly. But yeah, so Gnome Hollow and the artwork on this one is awesome. It's fun artwork. There are a million little pieces. They give you a whole bunch of bags and it's not really clear how you're supposed to get it all back into the box. I mean, it all fits fine. That's not the problem, but it's like, okay, do I separate all out the different kinds of mushrooms and do I separate all the different markers into different bags? If I wind up buying the game, I'm just going to bring in my own bags and I'll keep them all separate. And that way I can just parcel them out. But yeah, we wound up combining a bunch of stuff and you wind up having to sort it back out when you pull the game out. But it's fun. Very, very fun. The game ends when somebody moves their last marker down. You finish out, tell that everybody's had the same number of turns, or if you run out of hexes to put on the board. And so what you do is you put aside 2 hexes for every player that's playing. And that way, if you run out of the hexes to play, you just play off of that stack until everybody's had the equal number of turns. I think every time that I've played, somebody moved their last marker down before we were out of hexes. So anyway, super fun game. Really enjoying that. I am working on putting together an AI dev boot camp, and that's more in the vein of building out the agents like we talked about, as opposed to, and using some of the other tools. Like Whisper for transcriptions and text to speech or speech to text and all that stuff, right? That's offered out there. I'm looking at OpenAI as kind of a baseline, but I am looking at some of the other tools like Claude and Langchain and Olama or Llama 3 and some of those other tools that are out there just to give people an idea of what their options are. But yeah, it's going to get into how do I bring this stuff in and what options and services are out there that will let me do it. And so it's going to be, I guess, more focused on APIs and prompt engineering than it is going to be on like how the models actually get built and stuff like that. I've had a few people ask me, oh, so we're going to do all the data management and training our own models. And we might get into some of that if I'm showing you how to like enhance what Llama or Langchain give you, but not a lot. It's really focused on how do you create an awesome AI experience for your customers through an agent. So anyway, I'm going to be doing that sometime in January. And so that's going to be at AIDevBootcamp.com. And then I picked up a book on Amazon that, and it's, again, like I said, I'm kind of using OpenAI and its offerings as a baseline, recognizing that there are other systems and models that give you a lot of options for doing a lot of the same things and maybe better at one thing than another. And so I bought a book, and it's called Building AI Applications with ChatGPT APIs. And it shows you how to use, and the author is Alexander Petrovich. And it goes into basically all of the different API options. Hang on, it's being funny on Amazon, but it shows you how to use Whisper. It shows you how to use boy, it does not want to pull it up on Amazon, but I bought it for the Kindle, and yeah, it goes into Whisper, it goes into ChatGPT, yeah, it goes into a couple of the other options that you have on the OpenAI platform. So anyway, and it basically walks you through using their APIs and then how to build your prompts to get what you want. And so I'm excited to dive into that. So I'm going to pick that. And then the last pick I have is I've been training for triathlons again, and specifically my goal is to either do Ironman Maryland in September or Ironman Chattanooga in September. And so I've been picking my races leading up to that. I'm pretty excited about it. The workout regimen that I've been following is twofold. One of them, I picked up a training system on trainingpeaks.com. So I'm going to pick trainingpeaks.com, and you can buy workout plans. So mine's a 48-week workout plan, right? So I started it last month, and, I'm on track to finish it for Maryland. And then if I wind up signing up for Chattanooga instead, then I'll just tell it to adjust my workout schedule by 2 weeks so that I'm ending on the right day in September. And then the other one is I've been using the First Form app. That's 1STPHORM, First Form. And I signed up for Transformation Challenge is what they call it. And transformation is also spelled with a PH, right? Because of their branding. And as part of the app, you get a coach. And so she's been helping me figure out my, all my stuff. And so I have a referral code if you want to use my coach and sign up. I don't get any kickbacks for this. It's literally just, hey, I'm having a great experience with this. And so, you ought to check it out. And so, let me just airdrop it to my computer and then I can put it in the chat. But yeah, it's been awesome. So my trainer's name is Andrea. And like I said, so I get an announcement every day where she's essentially saying, hey, make sure you're getting enough sleep, or, hey, make sure that you're paying attention to this, that, or the other, or, all kinds of different things like that. And it's really, really been terrific. And then, she checks in like every week. I send an evaluation where I'm saying, I'm a little hungry. I've been a little hungry this week, or I've been a little tired this week, or, whatever. And then she'll chat back and say, you need to schedule more sleep. Right. Or, she'll look at my eating because I track all my calories in there too. And she'll say, hey, you need to eat more vegetables. Was something she told me the other day. She's like, you need to eat more real food and, less supplements, which is like the protein powders and stuff. And they have a whole bunch of different supplements like the protein powders. They have like a nootropic caffeine mix pre-workout. They have what else am I using? They have like an OptiGreens is what they call it, and it's greens that help with your digestion and stuff. I've got a couple here. I've got basically omega, which is like fish oil. And then I've got another one that's glucose disposal agent is what they call it, and it just helps regulate my blood sugar, which is good because I'm diabetic. And I just take it with all with the medications that my doctor's given me, and it's been awesome. So anyway, I'm just going to pick those. If you want to do an Ironman next year and you want, it'd be fun. I don't know, I don't know that I'd go the whole way with you because I might swim faster than you or you might bike faster than me, but it'd be fun. So if you're interested and you think you might be there, let me know. But yeah, those are my picks. Sorry, I rambled for a long time, but anyway, I think that's all I've got. So Valentino, thanks for being our expert this week.
Yeah, happy to. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. We need to get into some of the stuff that you and I are building with AI, but maybe that'll be another episode another time. And yeah, till next time, folks. Max out.